it together. Every time I look over, that's my son, there's my boy. And so that never.
2 weeks before his death, Rob Reiner finally spoke the sentence he had spent a lifetime circling but never saying out loud. I love my son, but I don't know how to save him. There was no anger behind the words. No resentment. Only fatigue. The kind that settles in after years of worry, relapse, hope, and prayers that never quite get answered. Rob Reiner, the man whose career was built on stories of friendship, healing, and second chances, was facing something no screenplay could resolve. His son was struggling once again. For years, Rob believed patience would be enough, that love, stability, and consistency would eventually reach him. But in that final interview, something was different. The confidence was softer. The certainty had cracks. His optimism had thinned, his hope worn down by time. He understood that the window was closing. What makes this story so devastating isn't what happened afterward, but what Rob already knew before the end. This wasn't a Hollywood narrative. It was a father's confession, and a warning that arrived too late. Rob Reiner had always believed in structure. He believed that showing up every day, doing the work, and staying present would lead to the right outcome. That philosophy shaped his career and guided his parenting. Unlike many in his world, Rob didn't disappear into fame or distance. He was there. He listened. He stayed engaged. From the outside, it looked like the perfect foundation for raising a child. But inside that structure was a quiet pressure no one openly discussed. Rob Reiner wasn't just a successful filmmaker. He was the son of Carl Reiner, a towering figure in American comedy. Growing up under that legacy taught Rob an unspoken truth. Expectations don't need to be voiced to be felt. When Rob became a father, he vowed not to pass that weight on. He promised his children freedom to fail, freedom to choose, freedom to be ordinary if they wanted. What he didn't see at first was how freedom without emotional clarity can still feel like distance. He gave his son room. He avoided pushing. He waited for the right moments to talk, moments that always seemed just ahead. Slowly, without meaning to, silence began doing the very thing Rob feared most. It grew. And by the time he realized something was truly wrong, it was no longer a matter of discipline or guidance. It was about a son who had already learned how to vanish, and a father who hadn't yet grasped what that disappearance truly meant. The warning signs never arrived loudly. They rarely do. When Rob Reiner began to sense something was wrong, it wasn't rebellion or rage. It was quiet. Unreturned calls. Short replies. A growing distance that couldn't be measured through conflict. Only through silence. Nick was still young when alcohol first entered his life. At the time, it didn't feel dangerous. It looked like experimentation, peer influence, something temporary that Rob believed would fade on its own. There were no explosive arguments, no dramatic moments demanding intervention. In a home shaped by trust and patience, Rob assumed time would naturally correct the course. But alcohol was only the opening door. Substances followed quietly, slipping in without chaos or spectacle. Pills, cocaine, chemicals that offered Nick something he couldn't articulate. They didn't make him wild or aggressive. They made him calm. For the first time, the noise in his head stopped. The pressure of expectations, the weight of a famous last name, the constant feeling of being measured all went silent. That silence became seductive. Rob and his wife didn't watch their son spiral outward. They watched him retreat. Nick didn't act out. He faded. Family dinners grew tense. Eye contact vanished. Conversations stayed shallow. Every attempt to reach him felt delayed, as if he had already emotionally exited before anyone noticed he was slipping away. When the truth finally became unavoidable, it arrived with crushing guilt. Rob replayed everything. Every pause. Every moment he chose patience instead of confrontation. He questioned whether his fear of becoming controlling had allowed something far more destructive to grow unnoticed. Treatment came, then more treatment, and then again. Each time, Rob waited with guarded hope. Every return felt like a reset, another chance to believe love had finally landed where it needed to. For brief stretches, Nick seemed present again, engaged, alive. Rob held on to those moments like proof that his instincts hadn't failed him, but addiction doesn't respect hope. Relapses arrived without warning. Sometimes weeks later, sometimes months. Each one stripped away another layer of optimism and replaced it with something heavier: vigilance. Rob learned to fear quiet nights, to dread late calls, to brace himself for news he prayed would never come. There were darker stretches, long periods when Nick vanished completely. Nights when Rob had no idea where his son was sleeping or whether he was safe at all. When Nick was homeless, moving from state to state, surviving on borrowed generosity and broken promises, Rob never stopped answering. He picked up the phone at any hour. He sent money when he knew he shouldn't. He reopened doors professionals advised him to close. Friends cautioned him about enabling. Specialists urged firm boundaries. Rob heard them, but he couldn't fully follow through. Stepping back felt too close to abandonment. And abandonment was the one thing he had sworn his children would never experience. Eventually, exhaustion forced his hand. Following clinical advice, Rob made a decision he would later question deeply. He cut off financial support and told Nick that treatment had to be pursued independently. He believed consequences might succeed where patience had failed. Instead, it created a deeper emotional divide. Nick experienced those boundaries as rejection. Rob viewed the distance as survival. Neither understood how completely they were missing each other. The years blurred into a relentless cycle. 17 rehabilitation attempts, emergency hospital visits, overdoses, a cocaine-related heart attack. Episodes of uncontrolled rage mid-flight that terrified even those closest to him. Each crisis stripped away another layer of certainty. What replaced it was a devastating realization Rob could no longer ignore. Love alone does not guarantee rescue. Over time, he learned to shrink his hopes, not because he cared less, but because hope had begun to hurt. He started wishing in smaller units. One good day instead of a future. One honest conversation instead of recovery. Then came being Charlie. On the surface, it was a creative project. In truth, it was a final attempt to reconnect. Rob directed. Nick co-wrote. The story mirrored their reality too closely to dismiss. A struggling addict, a famous father, a bond strained by fear, confusion, and love that couldn't quite reach its target. The process forced them into the same emotional space, not as parent and child, but as collaborators. There were arguments, long silences, moments when old wounds reopened. But there was also something unfamiliar: honesty without correction. Rob stopped fixing. Nick stopped hiding. For a brief time, it felt like progress, but understanding is not recovery. When filming ended, real life returned. The addiction remained. The cycle continued. Rob was left facing the most painful truth of all. He had reached the limit of what a parent could do. 2 weeks before his death, when he finally spoke publicly about his son, there was no drama and no blame. Only acceptance. He no longer sounded hopeful. He spoke like someone who had already mourned outcomes he could not change. He knew he couldn't fix it. He loved his son deeply, believed in him without reservation, yet sensed that something essential was slipping beyond his control. Inside that quiet admission lived a truth Rob had carried for years but never spoken plainly. The tragedy he feared wasn't abrupt or explosive. It had been forming slowly in silence over time. And what followed would confirm that even the strongest devotion can sometimes arrive too late to stop what is already unfolding. In the last stretch of his life, Rob Reiner grew noticeably quieter. Those closest to him sensed the shift. It wasn't despair or panic, but a heavy, unsettling stillness. He had stopped hunting for solutions, stopped believing that one more talk or one more attempt could redirect what was already moving forward. Some things, he realized, had reached their own momentum. When he spoke about his son, there was no illusion left in his voice. No judgment. No anger. Only acceptance. He had come to understand that certain struggles cannot be overcome through effort alone. 2 weeks later, Rob Reiner was gone, and the words he left behind no longer sounded like worry. They felt like goodbye. Many people focused on his legacy, the films, the accolades, the cultural footprint he left behind. But those who knew him best understood that his final years were shaped less by achievement and more by endurance. Rob had lived long enough to recognize a difficult truth. Some tragedies don't arrive as sudden blows. They creep in through repetition, through cycles that slowly erode certainty until acceptance is all that remains. For years, he had asked himself the same question. Every parent in his position asks it. What more could I have done? He never found an answer that brought relief. What troubled him most wasn't the addiction itself, but the fear that his son might believe he wasn't loved. Silence meant to avoid pressure may have felt like distance. Boundaries meant to protect may have felt like rejection. Rob carried that fear quietly long before he ever gave it words. He never placed blame on his son. Instead, he blamed circumstance, timing, and the invisible weight of expectations passed down through generations. He understood how pain could hide behind comfort, how suffering could go unnoticed when it didn't announce itself loudly or dramatically. For Rob Reiner, the most important lesson arrived too late to change the outcome, but not too late to matter. Love, he learned, isn't only about staying present. It's about being understood while you do. His story offers no neat resolution. There is no triumphant ending, no victory over darkness. What remains is something simpler and more honest. A reminder that even the most devoted parents have limits, and that guilt can linger long after hope fades. In the end, Rob Reiner's final words were not just about addiction. They were about silence, about waiting too long to say what matters, and about the danger of believing there will always be more time. Some stories don't end with closure. They end with understanding, and with the quiet ache of realizing that understanding arrived just a little too late. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share so these stories can reach more people.